It's good day to brew, baby. What is up, YouTube? It's your boy Millsy. Back from Talking About It, back for another episode of Millsy Brews, the show where I take my first pass at the commander in front of us on my quest out brew the magic world. You know the motto, baby. It's ABB, always be brewing, and that's what we're back to do today. The deck list is going to be down in the description for you below. As well as I'd really appreciate if you could do all that YouTube stuff, like, comment, subscribe. I'd really appreciate it. But today, we're finishing up the main portion of Precon. We talked about the secondary commander from the counterintelligence Precon, Kilo Apogee Mind. A Jeskai robot artificer with haste. This is whenever he becomes tapped, we're going to proliferate. And that's the goal of the deck. We're going to proliferate. Now, proliferating is just a mechanic. How are we going to do that? Well, we're going to try to pick a bunch of permanents that care about counters being on them and getting more of them, and try to create some sort of whacked out symphony with all of them on the battlefield. We've got the new spacecraft from the new set. Immediately my mind went to things like planeswalkers getting proliferated onto to have better abilities there. And lots of other creatures that care about counters in order for us to create an awesome machine moving forward. But I want to say a quick thank you to the channel members. Thank you so much for supporting the channel. If you're interested in seeing all of our videos just a teeny bit early for just $1 a month, consider checking that out down below. Okay, well, Kilo is one way to proliferate, but we do want other ways, specifically recurable if we can. We have temporary ways like Tezzeret's Gambit, so let's just draw 2 and then proliferate. We have creatures like Thrumming Burr that when they deal damage to a player, we're going to proliferate. Those are nice effects to get, each turn, stacking up with hopefully Kilo tapping each turn to proliferate. But then we have things like Tekethal, which will allow us to proliferate twice instead of once whenever we would proliferate. And that is going to make a big difference over the course of a couple turns if we can proliferate multiple times, adding more and more counters to our things. Although Prologue to Prometheus doesn't say proliferate on it, does give us a reason to proliferate in giving each of our opponents a poison counter. Remember that our opponents only need 10 poison counters to lose the game, and when we proliferate, we can put counters on players, meaning we can actually proliferate our poison counters up on our opponents, allowing us to create that threat. Reversal Potentials lets us proliferate and then protect our board by phasing our opponents out, or our permanents out that were given counters, allowing us to protect our board if we need to. Recron Craft Theta, if we crew it in an attack, allows us to proliferate on attack. Another great way to get some recurable proliferate for us. And then, since we know tapping Kilo causes proliferate to happen, we know that by tapping or untapping Kilo, we can do this multiple times. I think the most obvious example of this is Freed from the Real. So for blue mana, we can either tap or untap Kilo, meaning that if we have enough mana, we can just tap and untap Kilo as many times as we have mana proliferating and getting a bunch of value. Or if Dominion says we can pay 1 and tap an untapped creature we control to untap enchanted creature. Note that we can tap Kilo to untap Kilo with this ability, which is very interesting and will allow us again to have this go off. Pemenzor will only let us untap Kilo. It unfortunately isn't given the privilege to tap like these two do, but it is still important that we could potentially tap Kilo and untap it and then still attack or what have you, depending on what abilities we have access to. But I think the one thing I wanted to have fun with Kilo was Super Friends, aka Planeswalkers. Planeswalkers are really fun permanents that require counters on them to use their abilities. Most of them have abilities that either tick up or tick down to do something. And obviously, most of Planeswalkers have a larger ability that we want to work our way up to that has a really fun effect. So the goal on all of our Planeswalkers in our deck is to have ultimates, traditionally minus the highest amount of minus, to just give us great effects for us. Ajani, Adversary of Tyrants, gives us an emblem with it being your end step. We make some cat tokens with lifelink. Basri Ket makes us a soldier and puts a counter on each creature we control. Elspeth's just going to double up the amount of tokens we're going to make, which is important for some of our creatures that care about counters, but can give all of our creatures flying, which is pretty nice. Elspeth on our -7, and another Elspeth can give all of our creatures +2/+2 and flying. Narset Transcendent can give us an emblem preventing our opponents from casting non-creature spells. Teferi, Master of Time, is allowed to use his abilities on everybody's turn, but his -10 allows us to take 2 extra turns after this one. Teferi Temporal Program lets us choose an opponent, and that opponent chooses a permanent they control and returns it to their hand, and they shuffle each non-land permanent they own into their library. Tezzeret lets us get an emblem that says at the beginning of your end step, you search your library for a permanent and put it on the battlefield and shuffle. Aether Spark has a huge ability to add a bunch of mana and draw some cards. And I think you could start to see like the point here. These are all planeswalkers that have great zeros, great ones, +1s, great minuses. These have great abilities, but where I think they shine is these huge ultimates that are going to just add huge emblems for us. And the hope is that somebody like Tezzeret comes down, +1 to a 6, we're able to proliferate him a couple times, and the next turn he's able to use that ultimate, right, to give us that ability. And that's the goal, is to try to work our way up there, right, through the course of Kilo and other proliferate abilities in our deck to make them even better by hopefully getting them to their ultimates easier. But we also just have cards that care about counters. A Nimpakal, whenever we attack, puts a counter on herself and makes a bunch of gnome tokens that are tapped on attacking, where X is the number of counters on her. Of course, the more counters, the more gnomes. Chrome Host Seed Shark, whenever we cast a non-creature spell, incubates X, makes an incubator token with X counters on it, meaning we can proliferate how many counters are on that incubator. And then for 2 mana, we flip that incubator over into a creature that is basically just going to get +X, right, for the number of counters on it, allowing it to become a threat that way. Mikaeus can remove counters from itself to put a counter on every other creature we control, allowing us to then proliferate, right, those counters on our creatures. Threefold Thunderhulk comes in with a couple counters on it, and whenever it enters or attacks, you make gnomes equal to its power. Again, able to proliferating those counters means we're going to get more tokens each turn as we attack with the Thunderhulk. Andoril hands out counters whenever the equipped creature attacks. But if we have the City's Blessing, 2 counters go out instead. Again, just like Mikaeus, kind of creating that baseline of counters for all of our creatures that are out so they can get more. Astral Cornucopia comes in with a set number of charge counters on it, and we tap it to choose a color and add a mana of that color for each charge counter on it. Again, we can proliferate, making Astral Cornucopia tap for more and more mana turn over turn. Same thing with something like Everflowing Chalice. The only difference is the Chalice only taps for colorless mana, whereas we get our choice with the Astral Cornucopia. Darksteel Reactor is a fun artifact. At the start of our upkeep, we can put a charge counter on it, and as soon as it has 20 more charge counters on it, we win the game. So we can proliferate on here and add things onto here to really take advantage of that and work towards that. Golem Foundry gets a charge counter whenever we cast an artifact spell, and we can remove 3 counters from it to make a Golem creature token, allowing us to get some bodies on the board. Inside Engine, we can tap it and pay 2 to put a charge counter on it to draw a card for each charge counter on it. Well, we can proliferate counters on it to draw more and more every time we tap the engine. We're using our main spacecraft from the deck to help us out as well. It can hand out counters and charge counters every turn as long as we start stationing it up, and when we get all the way, it protects all of our artifacts. Lux Artillery says whenever we cast an artifact creature, it gains Sunburst, so it comes in with a +1/+1 counter for each color of mana spent to cast it. And then at the beginning of our end step, if there's 30 more counters among all of our artifacts and creatures, it deals 10 damage to each opponent. So a good reason to proliferate, getting us up right to that threshold and potentially handing out some damage right after combat, right? So that could be something we can really factor in to our game plan. Lux Cannon can remove 3 charge counters from itself to destroy a target permanent. So that's pretty nice to start holding up some removal. Magistrate Scepter, if we can get some charge counters on it, lets us take charge counters off of it to take an extra turn. Could be brutal if we could find enough ways to get enough counters on it every turn to continue to take extra turns. It's not completely impossible, but it's also not easy to do. But it's important to know that that is an option of a route you can go. Titan Forge can do very similar things to the Golem Foundry. The only difference is it has to tap to do it, and it makes a big 9/9 Golem token that we can take advantage of. All Be One says whenever a counter would be put on a permanent or player, it deals that much damage to target opponent, creature opponent controls, or planeswalker opponent controls. So the more permanents and players we're proliferating onto, the more triggers of All Be One to just hand out some damage and start really dealing with either opponent's threats or their faces directly. And then Resourceful Defense, whenever a permanent we control leaves the battlefield, if it had counters on it, we get to move those counters onto another target permanent. And then for 5 mana, we can move any number of counters from one thing to another thing we control, which is important depending on what we have out. maybe we have an artifact that has 5 or 6 charge counters on it. We move them over to that Magistrate Scepter and just starting to really profit. Truthfully, there's a lot of ways we can interact with counters, and that's what the deck aims to do. Just run the gambit of ways we can interact with counters and proliferate them to make our game plan better. But I've said before on the show, and I'll say it again, no deck's ever complete. This is my first pass at Kilo. And I think going into testing, the answer is, do we have enough ways to interact with it? Are there enough things that we care about having these things? Things like Kappa Cannoneer can be a creature that when it grows becomes a real threat. Whenever it or another artifact comes in, you put a counter on it, it can't be blocked till end of turn. Here's a threat that continue to grow and become a threat as the game goes on. We have things like Phyrexian Metamorph and other artifact copiers that come in and copy key artifacts we might have, Lux Artillery, Magistrate Scepter. There's a lot of ways we could come in and copy these key artifacts for big gain or key creatures, at the right time. And then my thought was, if we don't want Kilo to attack, we could use something like Paradise Mantle to give Kilo the ability to tap for a mana, right? And then it's tapping and proliferating. There's a lot more ways we could look into really taking advantage of Kilo tapping to proliferate that I haven't done in the brew. But if we see more opportunities for it, right? Obviously, there's room to do that. But I've said it before on the show, and I'll say it again. Our favorite thing to do with our decks, of course, is to show off our playtests. Remember, the goal of playtests on our channel is not to find Magical Christmas Land. It's not to show off all our best plays blankly, but it's just to get in these games, play scenarios, and kind of understand what hands are we looking for and how are we going to set up our game plan. Here I've got a 3-lander, perfect amount of mana for Kilo. I've got an Imp called Start Growing. Kaith is a very interesting creature from the Modern Horizons 3 commander deck. It can tap to either proliferate or populate. It gives all of our creatures the option to either come in with a counter on it or make an artifact token. There's Thrumming Bird for the proliferate and the Seed Sharks. We've got a lot of really great stuff in our disposal. I think we just kind of want to work our way right up to getting some things in. So my thought here is Thrumming Bird, because I'd really like to just kind of go Thrumming Bird into an Impicall here. I mean, you could also go you could also go Kilo, but the truth is, to me, we don't have us enough to do there. So when Thrumming Bird attacks, an Impicall goes off, makes us that gnome, right? And then the hope is Thrumming Bird hits, right? Proliferating, giving an Impicall that extra counter so that she can continue to make us more gnomes. Here, let's see. We could go Tekkathol and try to guarantee the double proliferate. We could go like Felwar Stone into Kilo and get another proliferate when Kilo goes ahead and attacks. My thought is that would be an Impicall for 4 this turn and then proliferate after combat up to 5. I think that makes the most sense to me. So we're going to go into combat, attack with Thrumming Bird and Kilo. Kilo taps, proliferating, right? On the attack trigger, an Impicall goes off, making 4 gnomes, right? And then eventually when Thrumming Bird hits, we're adding another counter, so we ended up proliferating twice, right? But now the point is we have these gnomes sitting around. They're going to be continued attacking Tekker for us. Maybe next turn we don't have to attack with them if we want to leave them back to block. But the point is now we're making more and more and more of these every turn. I mean, Tekkathol could make a ton of sense now because now you're proliferating before and after combat, right? So I don't even mind going for that this turn. In Spirit, I really like. The only reason I'm not valuing it highly in this position is remember that In Spirit cannot put counters on an Impicall. It can only put a counter on an artifact. So because an Impicall is the thing we're growing here, I don't think it makes the most sense. I think it makes the most sense go to attack. An Impicall gets 2 counters on the double proliferate. Then it gets a counter, right? Makes 8 gnomes. Those gnomes are tapped for attacking, and we can leave those back. And then, of course, after combat, right, proliferating again. And now we really just have this gnome engine, hopefully, going online as people try to either deal with the things that are making the proliferates worse or the thing that's getting worse as we're just amassing gnomes. And now, right, the hope is we can just continue to let this train run away from the station. In Spirit could actually come down here and really start getting. I mean, we could probably just tap 8 gnomes and just turn it straight online if we wanted to. Still wouldn't be able to attack because it wouldn't have haste, but then it could at least protect all of our other artifacts, which would be pretty useful. And make that a threat. Start a combat. We could put its counter on Kilo, right, from its first ability. Then Kilo would get to proliferate. And I think we're in a good spot here. Yes, it's fairly relying on Nimpicall and making all these gnomes. But again, my point here is to show off one of the options you have, right, to set up your game plan and get it going. Here on playtest number 2, we're looking at a 4-lander with Teferi, Master of Time. Remember, Teferi can use its +1 on everybody's turn. And that -10 is pretty great, but the -3 is also great to phase something out. There's Pemin's Aura. Again, not as good as Freed from the Real, but an option. And then a little bit of removal and Plowshares. I think we've got to start by getting some of these tap lands in since we don't have a land with a basic land type. There we see the Pheresis. So we do kind of have a nice way to start. We can get Kilo in. There's just nothing to proliferate. So I'm kind of thinking about just doing the prologue. I'm going to basically just use this as a mark for everybody's poison counters since we're going to be proliferating them, right? Just so we kind of know where we're at and what we're trying to do. Kilo, attack. Everybody gets one right. I think that kind of makes a ton of sense. Here, I love the idea of Go-Go. Go-Go can start copying the proliferate, which would be pretty cool. I'm trying to think what makes the most sense. We could Astral for 1 and proliferate it to be better on future turns. Hold up the Plowshares maybe, right? Attack, proliferate. So now this is actually 2, which isn't quite enough to play. I guess we could play something like Go-Go still and call it, into the next turn there. Now coming into the next turn, 6 mana up, 2 from the Cornucopia. I love the idea of something like Teferi. We could fabricate for a whole lot of things at this point. Magistrate Sceptre, we could go ahead and fabricate for Lux Cannon. There's so many things we could go get. Or we could just save the mana and proliferate 4 times this turn, 1 on Kilo and then 3 into Go-Go into the X to, get this up to, be 4 times total, right? 1 from this and then 3 from this, right? Really starting to get this process up. Now the Cornucopia could play something like Teferi. There's a lot of things we could do from here. But I think the point is, this is how this, Go-Go trigger really helps Kilo in proliferating. Now Astral's tapping for more and more mana, and we could use Teferi basically to start digging, is my thought. You +1 to draw and then discard, again, to start pitching the things you don't want, and you can +1 Teferi on everybody's turn, just hopefully digging right through our deck for more things that we can use to commit to the board. Kind of a shorter playtest on that one, but I think the next turn we just have it, right? As long as somebody doesn't block and kill Kilo there in combat, we have it. I think it's important to kind of at least see the line how you can play it out. Let's get into playtest number 3 here. Keep it a 3-lander with the Talisman for some more mana. There's the Titan Forge, so hopefully we can get a charge counter on it and get it started. There's the Resourceful Defense, and then Tekethal to double up on that proliferate. So we love the look of this one. We do need to get the Talisman down. That'll turn the Spire online. There's Althros, Research Craft. At 3 or more, whenever we cast an artifact, we get to put a counter on it. And then once it gets up to 12, it becomes a spacecraft that gets bigger for each artifact we control. I was going to say, I think the answer for me is the Titan Forge. Makes the most sense. I could a Johnny, but I'm not really putting anything on anything. I'm a real mana off of that. I guess I could get Althros down and then play the Kilo next turn and use it to station the Althros and proliferate. That seems like kind of an interesting option. Maybe we go for something like that. Now my thought is play Kilo, station the craft, which is going to set off a proliferate, right? Giving me an extra 1. We can hold up the mana for the Swords to Plowshares. But now as we come back to our turn, now I don't mind something like a Johnny, since it gets up to my seeing Tekethal might make sense. Getting the double proliferate. So we could station with Tekethal and then station with Kilo and then proliferate twice. So now this would be turned online, and it's just 3 right now, a 3/8, but that's okay. It can now grow over the course of these next few turns. I would have loved another mana for Wanderglyph. I don't think Titan Forge seems like a bad idea. Again, attack. Oh, sorry, that draws us a card, right, and puts a charge counter on craft. I hope I didn't miss that before now. But there's Inspirit. Inspirit's another good station we can get down and start handing out counters, right, that we can proliferate. As we come into our next turn, 5 mana. I love the idea of Inspirit, but I really love the idea of the Wanderglyph as well. We get a charge counter on that, but I think it's Inspirit. Tap Techathal to turn it online. I could tap Kilo to proliferate, which proliferate me twice, right? Turning Inspirit online. Sorry, we would have also drawn off of Othos. Now we're starting to build a really nice board, right? We've got some interesting things in our hand. Go can copy that proliferate. I would love to get some counters onto Kilo, which is what I thought of, something like a Johnny, right? Could have put a counter on it and Techathal, start proliferating them. These are really helpful, and all of our artifacts have hexproof and indestructible with Inspirit, so now we're really protecting some of these. And maybe this time we put charge counters on Titan Forge to get it going, so we can start making those golems as we just continue to process forward. There's Teferi. Teferi's a great one, allowing us to make those spirits that grow as we draw cards. I mean, at this point, I think it's just dealer's choice how you want to do it. Whether you want to go Teferi and make the spirits that grow, go for a Johnny and put the counters on these guys so that they can start growing, right? And then you basically, on that would be my thought, go here, put the counters here so they can start growing. Now you'll potentially be able to use its ultimate next turn, right? Because we're going to proliferate at least twice this turn, right? With what we have out there. My thought on Inspirit would be put the counters on Titan Forge just so we can tap it and make that big 9/9, attack out, right? We've got some big attackers. The Uthros is going up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So it's now a 6/8 in the air. Inspirit's still pretty big. You're now proliferating twice, right? On all of these. So the golems, this is back up to its right before, and we can now hopefully be getting one every turn as Inspirit can put 2 on it, and we can proliferate twice. And I think we've just built a great board state that we have access to. Let's go through one more playtest here. Here we're keeping a 4-lander with the Golem Foundry, so don't need to tap it in order to make the golems, but the golems are smaller. There's Andoril for the counters, and then Swords to Plowshares. So a little bit of a slower start to this one, right? Get Andoril down. 3 for the Golem Foundry, and my only reason to start with the Foundry is because then when I cast Kilo, it gets a charge counter, right? So it can be proliferated upon, and then attack to proliferate, just so we can get those going. There's Narset, a Planeswalker we can get down and start going. Solar Ray either way is mana, which I feel like could be important. I would really love to play the Chromehost Seed Shark. I think that's maybe what I'm going to do. And it gets Sunburst. I'd say it probably is at least 2, but let's call it 3 just for the best case scenario where we got all the right things. Attack, proliferate. And I'd probably just remove 3 right away to go ahead and just make that golem, right? So that way it's here on our next turn. Coming into our next turn, again, Narset's one of those ones that could be pretty good. It would be pretty easy to get it going. Same thing with a Johnny. A Johnny could come in and get some tokens on Kilo and then have a really good proliferate, to go there. I think I like the idea of Narset. +1, we're going to look at the top card of our library, If it's a non-creature non-land, we can reveal it and put it into our hand. It is. It's freed from the reel, and a really great one at that, because now we could get it down and get it on Kilo this turn. We just don't have the mana to activate him. Sorry, on the cast there, we're gonna get a 4 incubator. I mean, we cast it on Kilo. Get a 3 incubator, right? And then go to combat, attack. We're gonna proliferate there, and there, right? Now, we wish we could untap Kilo and do those shenanigans, but we can do it next turn, right? Hopefully, we've got 4 blue mana, so we might be able to, right, really get some shenanigans next turn off of Kilo proliferating. Now, the problem is I have no way to use the white mana for that and this. So I have 4 blue mana. I could basically tap Kilo. Well, okay, so there's different ways. We could attack, which would trigger the proliferate, untap, tap, untap, tap. Untap, tap, untap, tap. So we get 3 taps out of it, as opposed to just using free from the reel, which gets 2 taps. I think that probably makes the most sense. 1, 2, 3 extra mana. We could flip one of these incubators over if we want to. But again, attack to proliferate. Like I said, blue to untap, blue to tap, proliferate. Blue to untap, blue to tap, proliferate again. Now Narset's online. The Golem Foundry is able to get another Golem. -9. Now our opponents can't cast non-creature spells, and I think we're in good shape continuing to proliferate the Golem Foundry to turn out the Golems. Anytime we cast more non-creature spells, we're getting the incubators, which are going to grow and become threats. We flip one over this turn, we flip one over next turn, get the Andoril to make them even bigger, and I think we're just off to the races. But I'd love to know, what do you think of Kilo down in the comment section below? It's a very interesting deck. A lot of ways you can take the proliferate, and then there's going to be a lot of options for it online. I'd love to know which one you're going to take, and I will catch you on the next one.